but it does have something to teach us about, I think, the fact that you know, MI5 aren't exactly operating, you know, smoothly and detecting all the potential terrorists, and may actually be making things worse. And certainly, like we saw with the Stephen Lawrence revelations recently, I'm not sure I trust the government to define who is worth spying on and who's not.
But wasn't sure the problem that these people should have been identified and caught before they even did this? So they should have been on the radar system of the security services.
The security services, unfortunately, cannot guarantee that they will successfully apprehend every single wannabe terrorist before that person carries out their crime. If you look at the time between 7/7 and Woolwich, enormous numbers of wannabe terrorists have been apprehended, have been brought to trial, have been convicted. In many cases they plead guilty, in other cases they've been convicted on the basis of proper admissible evidence and are in jail. Woolwich, sadly, was a case where seem to have two people who were being monitored by MI5 but somehow slipped through the net. They obviously didn't get their risk assessment right, but in a real world, mistakes will happen.
Mistakes will happen?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that was just said. You know, they had, you know, one of them was trying to go to Nigeria to fight with Boko Haram. You know, they stopped him, they tried to talk him out of it, brought him back, he tried again. You know, the MI5 was trying with these individuals, and so I think the criticism of MI5 is, you know, is quite difficult. I think a lot of people don't know the decisions that they have to make on a day-to-day basis about who to follow and who not. And, you know, in the real world, they will inevitably make mistakes.
I want to come back, Hilary, to the student rights report, which we're discussing today. I mean, the debates around gender segregation in Islamic societies, I mean, is this an issue of freedom of choice? Oh, you said that women do have, I think you were implying, do have a woman of choice in this.
I think it is. There are certainly female students who wish to be at segregated events as well, and that's their choice as far as I'm concerned. And actually, what's interesting is that student rights, after they were criticised, also said, oh, we have no problem with voluntary segregation. So their narrative is really all over the place with this. They also denied that they conflated segregation with extremism and its kind of connotations of violence, even though the director Raheem Kassam is on record as saying that. So really with such vague, broad terms as extremism, we see how this bleeds in other issues and really tarring kind of all Muslim students.
Mohammed, they're making a connection here between segregated events and radicalisation. I mean, it's a big jump forward, really.
It's a ridiculous jump. I mean, my view on segregation, first of all, is straightforward. I believe in freedom of choice, and that means that if women or men wish to sit by themselves away from men and women, as the case may be, they have the freedom to do that, provided also that those men and women who wish to sit together have the freedom to sit together. So a hall for an event like that would, in my view, should have a designated zone for women who want to sit by themselves if they want to sit there, a zone for men, and a mixed zone, provided that there's space. Now, there normally is space. The idea of compulsory segregation I regard as completely wrong.
But Jonathan, I mean, that's a big leap between talking about segregation. I saw you nodding when we were talking about people have a right to choose, but then saying that leads to radicalisation.
Yeah, I think that's a ridiculous leap. You know, to label that as extremism. I completely agree with what was just said, though, in terms of, you know, it should be freedom of choice. If certain women, but that means that the events can't stipulate that there has to be gender segregation. Exactly as was just said, there should be areas where if women want to sit apart, if men want to sit apart, they can do that. And if they don't want to, they should be able to do that as well. But to tie it to radicalisation, I think, is not proper.
Hilary, we've got this PREVENT programme, which also involves government funding, as well as I understand it, for particular Muslim organisations of choice. I mean, how does that work?
Well, as I understand it, the initial aim was to help communities to counter terrorism, sort of community-led approach. What's happened in practice is that the remit has broadened, and it's not only challenging violent extremism, it's got this the idea that we have to have shared values. So it wants to construct everyone as sort of patriotic, you have to be pro-foreign policy, and that means that there's certain organisations get funded, certain organisations don't. Even particular types of Islam are being sort of favoured in practice, and that's very divisive within the community.
A divisive programme, Mohammed?
The purpose of the PREVENT programme is to stop people wanting to become terrorists. That's a very challenging target. And before somebody sets off a bomb, they will already have built up extreme views. They just haven't gone through to commit an act of terrorism. The challenge, of course, is that there will be other people in society who have equally extreme views but will never have any intention of committing acts of terrorism, but will entirely engage in democratic processes. So the challenge is to come up with a way of identifying which of those two kinds of people you're dealing with and stopping people going down that path towards terrorism. In June 2011, the government issued its revised PREVENT strategy because it wasn't satisfied with the strategy that was inherited from the Labour Party. But since then, we haven't seen any new details about what the details of the new PREVENT strategy are and how it's going to be operating.
But Jonathan, returning to a point where you said before, I mean, extremism is not just a Muslim problem, is it? So
no.
The focus does seem to be rather one-sided.
Yes, but if we listen to the security services and the assessment of risk that we face, then the risk is still overwhelmingly Al-Qaeda-inspired or Islamist-inspired attacks. Yes, the far right has mobilized in recent years. Of course, the EDL is taking to streets, and that's a different kind of type of extremism, but it's not, we haven't seen the same level of plots, either successful or foiled, with respect to far right individuals as we have with the others. So I do think, in terms of counterterrorism, the government does have it right. Now, when we talk about the extremism agenda, that's actually in a different department. That's not in the Home Office. That's with the Department for Communities and Local Government. And there, I absolutely think that they should focus on different types of extremisms, and far-right extremism should be a major priority.
Because we are seeing a spike in attacks on mosques, schools, in the wake of the Woolwich incident, aren't we?
We did see more attacks in the wake of a Woolwich incident. Historically, that always is the case, that there is a spike of attacks. Of course, any of those attacks are incredibly serious. But they were quite small scale if you put them into the broader context. I think 11 mosques were attacked, and that's out of thousands. I don't know the number of how many mosques are in the UK. So we have seen that, but I don't think we can put it on par with respect to countering terrorism as we can with Al-Qaeda-inspired type groups.
And it will trend down. The Community Security Trust do similar reports on anti-Semitic attacks, and when there is a major cause such as the war in Gaza or the war in Lebanon, it spikes up, but then it trends down again. And the same thing will happen with anti-Muslim attacks.
But Hilary, we can't really downplay some of these attacks. We did see a school burnt to the ground, a mosque where actually worshippers were inside, which was attacked with petrol bombs. I mean, they were quite serious attacks.
It is extremely serious, and it's different to anti-Semitic hatred because it's actually a discourse that's condoned by the media and the political elites. I mean, we saw Tony Blair recently saying there's a problem within Islam, and not just the tabloids, but the Sunday Times, other broadsheet newspapers are really legitimising this dialogue, and that then plays out in government programmes.
Slow down. Let's be precise. The media no part of the media has legitimised violence against Muslims. No part of the media is saying it's good to burn down mosques.
No, but they have headlines saying, Muslims this, Muslims that. They mention race when it's irrelevant, and surely you wouldn't deny that they're feeding hatred of Islam. Surely not.
I would deny that, yes.
Really? Okay, so you should read the Daily Express once in a while.
Do you think it is deniable that the media is feeding Islamophobia?
That's a
big question.
£10 million question. Yeah, I think the articles that people that are tended to be written about Muslims do tend to be overwhelmingly in a negative light. I think Mohammed's right, though, that you can't say that the media is condoning, any part of the media is condoning or encouraging and not condemning the types of attacks that we would see in the wake of Woolwich.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that they're not condemning violence, but I think that it's very easy to, for everyone to condemn a violent attack. The problem is they don't condemn racist language. They actually participate in discourses that single out Muslims, especially these days, around, for example, the child abuse debate. They racialise these debates, and it's not helpful in tackling child abuse, and it's not helpful in terms of social cohesion.
Mohammed, we did have an incident where they were talking about these two kind of horrendous attack in which they said they were of Muslim appearance, but actually they weren't of Muslim appearance at all. I mean, it seems a very strange way to describe someone.
That was a slip by one journalist in the heat of the moment, and I think that journalist has themselves sort of apologised for the slip. These things happen, and it should not be blown out of proportion.
Although I think he said he was using Downing Street sources.
No.
So,
well, he was quoting somebody else, but as I said, everybody makes mistakes.
But it's quite serious and it's indicative of a problem. If someone said of Jewish appearance, you'd be like, well, what is that? And it's the same question, what is Muslim appearance, you know? I mean, I think it's indicative of a real problem.
yeah, it is a rather strange way, isn't it? There's a caricature here.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's an isolated example. Like Mohammed said, that was probably just one journalist in the heat of the moment. And the fact of the matter is the perpetrators want to be identified as Muslims themselves. You know, they claim to be committing the act in the name of Islam.
He was quoting the police, wasn't he? It was from a police source.
Well, I don't know the details about that.
Okay.
Of course, any kind of speculation with respect to that kind of thing about appearance, you know, is completely wrong and, you know, shouldn't have a place in a major news source.
We're going to take a break now. We'll rejoin the debate after a few minutes. Welcome back to the debate. Don't forget, you could join this debate using Twitter. The hashtag is going to come up on screen now, so please send in your comments, your questions, your disagreements. Let's have a real debate beyond the studio. Now, I want to turn back again to some of the issues we've been discussing about this, and which really comes down to a definition of extremism, which is, some people would say, again, there's a problem with this because there is a legitimate, and I think people were saying earlier on, there's a legitimate criticism you can have of British foreign policy, the wars, the occupations. But does that make you an extremist, Mohammed?
Of course not. People are entitled to have any views that they want about British foreign policy or indeed British domestic policy. And they're entitled to seek to change that policy through lawful democratic means as much as they wish.
So how would you define it then? Because the problem is that it used to be about preventing violence, and now it's this. Just talk about preventing extremism, which has no workable definition.
How would you define it, Douglas? John?
Defining extremism, yeah, that's another tough one. I mean, I would tend to take it a bit closer to the violence end of the spectrum before it gets to be extremism. You know, I think anything that is, it's obviously a relational term to some extent. It's people who are on the margins of general public opinion. Now, when we talk about kind of Al-Qaeda-inspired extremism, you know, I think it's very difficult. I think it's a debate to be had. One definition could be wanting to see the imposition of Sharia law in a non-Muslim majority country like the UK, like Anjem Choudhury wants. I would say that is extremism. It's hard to come up with just one kind of definition of extremism. I don't necessarily agree with the government's definition, especially if it's classifying people extremists if they are you know, opposed to foreign policy. Absolutely not. But I think, you know, we have to kind of tease out the definitions to understand what we're talking about with respect to the far right. You know, people who want to see people, you know, who are second, third generation immigrants to the UK sent home to an origin country, that is clearly extremism. You know, anything in the realm of violence or advocating violence obviously fits